Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Well, thank you, everybody. A very warm welcome to my fellow alumni and friends from the Asia Pacific region, as well as those of you who may be joining us from other parts of the world. In case you don't know me, my name is David Wu, class of 1990, and current president of the MIT Club of Hong Kong. I am pleased to be able to open tonight's session, part of a series of the MIT Alumni Forum, which is an online gathering that addresses global challenges and the many ways that MIT alumni are helping create a better world. I'm very thankful to the MIT AA for giving the Hong Kong Club an opportunity to host this session. Today's program features our distinguished alumnus, Jean-Jacques Degroof. Jean-Jacques is from Belgium, joining us from Boston tonight. He earned his Master of Science in 1993 and PhD in 2002 from the MIT Sloan School of Management. Prior to that, he obtained several degrees from the Université Catholique de Louvain. He started his career in the financial services industry in Belgium and then transitioned to academia and MIT Industrial Performance Center and the Massimo Ramani Center for Business and Government. While conducting research on the commercialization of academic research, Jean-Jacques facilitated the launch of several technology companies in the US and Europe, which started a new phase in his career in investment management. Many of the companies in his portfolio have successfully listed on exchanges, while others have been acquired by larger companies. Alongside his very successful career, Jean-Jacques is very involved in philanthropy, with a particular focus in the areas of entrepreneurial education and aging. He's an active MIT alumnus and engages with the Institute as a member of various visiting committees and advisory boards. Jean-Jacques is the author of a book titled From the Basement to the Dome, How MIT's Unique Culture Created a Thriving Entrepreneurial Community, which was just published by the MIT Press a few months ago in September. This book describes how MIT's problem-solving ethos, multidisciplinary approach, and experimental mindset nurture entrepreneurship. And this book serves as a backdrop for tonight's conversation with Jean-Jacques. Facilitating our conversation tonight is Elaine Wong, my fellow alumna here in Hong Kong, class of 1997. Elaine was previously a term board member of the MIT AA and also past president of the MIT Club of Beijing. I'm sure many of you have heard from Elaine before, and she will undoubtedly engage in a very insightful conversation with Jean-Jacques. During tonight's session, if members of the audience have any questions they'd like to ask Jean-Jacques, may I ask that you please type these into the Q&A function at the bottom of your window, and we'll try to get to as many of these questions as we can. So without further delay, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to both Jean-Jacques and Elaine. Thank you.
David, thank you very much for the introduction. And Jean-Jacques, thank you very much for being with us tonight, and actually just really for writing this book. I really enjoyed reading it and thought that it was actually a really important book to write, because so many people, including myself, have been curious about how MIT has developed an ecosystem that is thriving with so many different startups. And it's a long history of startups, right? It's not just a snapshot of time. And yet, if you just pay a visit to MIT, you will never get the full breadth of how this is accumulated over time. And most researchers don't have the benefit of being a student, an alum, an entrepreneur, and an investor, and now a researcher. So thank you very much for that. Just for the benefits of the audience who haven't had a chance to read the book, can you just give us a short summary of the story arc of the book and potentially what motivated you to write it?
Yes, thank you, Elaine, and thank you to all the participants to this webinar. It's very stimulating for me to know that so many people have interest in my book and its topic. So my motivation in writing this book, there were multiple motivations, but let me share with you one of them. As I was on campus years ago, and as I returned to campus over time, I tried to go to all these entrepreneurship events on campus. And when I thought I knew all of them, I discovered a new one and then another one, and they didn't seem to be even sometimes not aware of each other. So it really created a puzzle in my mind. And as entrepreneurship became more important, drew more interest over the years, the puzzle grew also in my mind. And I thought that, how did we get here? And how did we get to the stage of this thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem? And I thought someone ought to try to tell the story, and I took on the challenge. So I think the second part of your question was about an overview of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So in the book, I'm trying to address the following question that I just mentioned. How did we get here? How did this thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem develop over the years? And the answer is quite counterintuitive. Then we can go address it later on. Then I address the question, well, why at MIT more than in other universities, and how could it happen in this unconventional way? In short, in 2 words, without much coordination. And then I'm trying to map the current state of entrepreneurship at MIT. And I touch upon the impact of entrepreneurship outside of campus. And at the end of the book, I try to draw some lessons that we could learn from the MIT case study.
Was there when you were doing research on the book, was there a particular entrepreneur or a company that really stood out in your mind that they kind of had a showcase of how entrepreneurship develops, what that process looks like at MIT?
Yes, there is one story that I like in particular. It's the story of the students who founded the 10K business plan competition. Why? Because I think it's very representative of the way other initiatives developed over the years from the bottom up. And here is the story in a few words. In 1988-89, a small group of students, both in the School of Engineering and at the Sloan School, created 2 student clubs. The first one, dedicated to entrepreneurship, and they eventually merged. They thought that in order to get visibility, entrepreneurship back then was a very small phenomenon, and there was limited interest in entrepreneurship on campus. And so they decided that to get visibility, they would create a business plan competition that they called the 10K business plan competition. Why 10K, by the way? it's because back then it was the cost for filing a patent. And so they started to lobby the Dean of Engineering, the Dean of the Sloan School. They approached local companies and alumni to get sponsorship. And in the end, in 1990, spring of 1990, they launched the first edition of the 10K business plan competition. It was quite successful. If I remember well, there were something like 50 teams participating. And the competition was repeated over the years, and up until today, it's changed its name to the 50K entrepreneurship competition, and today the 100K entrepreneurship competition. Today, in the last years, there were around 250 teams participating in the competition with 1,000 students. And the competition has been repeated or copied or translated all over the world. So we see here a small initiative from students with no resources, but a lot of energy and entrepreneurial energy who manage to navigate the system, get the resources they need, and reach their objective. And from there, it snowballs. It's quite representative of what has happened in the last decades in the extracurricular side of MIT with relationship with entrepreneurship.
One of the key takeaways from the book was that the MIT culture is really a large part of its success in becoming a hotbed for entrepreneurship. Can you kind of sum up for the audience, what are those key elements of MIT's culture that enabled its success?
Yes, of course. So let's start from the observation I just referred to, this spontaneous initiatives in the area of extracurricular activities in the form of business plan competitions, student clubs, conferences, networking activities, and so on. That are initiatives or individuals such as students, faculty members, staff members, alumni. Alumni played a major role and still do, who just pursue their ideas, develop their activities without much coordination. And it's kind of a bottom-up phenomenon, hence the title of my book, From the Basement to the Dome. So the question is, how was that possible? And how did it happen? And why did it happen this way? And my argument refers indeed, as you said, to the culture of MIT. I think the key is that this was driven by MIT's culture, which we can summarize by the mind and hand, mens and manus motto of MIT, and the logo showing the scientist and the worker. And actually saying that it is not very new. For a long time, people at MIT have said, "Oh, entrepreneurship is important here, or it works well because it's in our culture, it's in our DNA." But I wanted to go a step further. So what is it in this culture that drives entrepreneurship, and why? So I think the answer is that there are elements of the MIT culture that you also find in entrepreneurship. And it's this cultural fit that made entrepreneurship grow more at MIT than in most other universities. And made it easy for the members of the community to adopt entrepreneurship. Let me try to be a little more specific. Excellence. Excellence obviously is a core value at MIT, but it's also a requirement in entrepreneurship. It's very demanding, very tough, as the number of, or the percentage of spin-offs startups that fail illustrate. Problem solving. There is a strong ethos of problem solving at MIT, as we know, and it's represented in its logo also. But when we think about it, entrepreneurship, it's just a mode, a type of problem solving. And the first thing an entrepreneur needs to do is identify a problem to solve, a need to meet, and imagine and build a solution to this problem that is commercially viable. So we see again this correspondence between the culture and entrepreneurship, or requirements of entrepreneurship. Same with experimentation. Experimentation is also big at MIT. It's at the core of the scientific endeavor. And what is entrepreneurship, or the entrepreneurial process, but experimenting, trying, trial and error, failing and starting over again, iterations? The answer is not in a textbook. So again, we see this cultural fit at that level as well. Same with multidisciplinarity. For the sake of time, I'm perhaps not going to go into all the details. The desire to have impact, which is also reflected in the logo and motto of MIT. And this identity, quirky identity of pride in being a bit different, or of being, you know, the nerds and the outsiders, and maybe sometimes the underdog. Let's not forget that MIT was originally a vocational school that was looked down upon by its neighbors, let's say. And what's an entrepreneur but an outsider, an underdog who is trying to displace the incumbents, right? So all these this cultural fit, I think, drove the interest in entrepreneurship and made it easier to adopt entrepreneurship than in other places.
Yeah, that's very interesting. As you kind of walk through the different cultural elements of MIT, I think that all of us who are alumni resonate with all of those points. But it's kind of funny that in bringing together those cultural elements, not once have you said that people go to MIT to say, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. That is not necessarily sort of the culture of it. And yet the culture of MIT enables startups to thrive and bubble up from the ground, right? And so I think there are some other schools that say, okay, we want, or there are people who show up. And as an investor, I see this a lot. People who say, I just want to make money and I want to start a company, as opposed to I want to solve a particular problem.
Yes. Indeed, this is a good point. And I think that until recently, I mean, the early mid 2010, there was really no official policy of promoting entrepreneurship at the level of the central administration. So what this culture triggered more than entrepreneurship in the sense of firm formation is an entrepreneurial mindset. And I think it's very important to stress this, because not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, and not everybody should be an entrepreneur, of course, but everybody could benefit from developing an entrepreneurial mindset, whether the person goes into entrepreneurship or works in government or in large corporation or other sectors. Something I perhaps failed to mention earlier, if you allow me. So there were this myriad of initiatives developing from the bottom up. But what is also very important is to mention is that also there was no specific policy from the top with regard to entrepreneurship until recently. MIT allowed its members who launched all these initiatives to experiment. It provided space and opportunities to experiment and sometimes to fail. And that's key. I think to give space, breadth, opportunities for these experimentations.
Indeed, I think that people say that if you don't fail once in a while, you haven't taken enough risk.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
Like I mean, I know MIT quite well. I've been, obviously I've been a student and alum there, and having been on the board, I see how decentralized MIT is, right? And so, right now today, there are over 60 different courses on entrepreneurship at MIT. But it's really only in the last 15 or so years that MIT's administration has kind of shifted their approach, right? I think Lita Nelson kind of summed it up as it's gone from incidental to purposeful.
Yes.
Can you kind of describe what are the drivers for that change? And then maybe help us think through what are some of the dynamics around it. And so on the one side, is there any danger that if you focus too much on a top-down approach to entrepreneurship, will more bureaucracy stifle innovation? And then on the flip side, is there any danger of an overemphasis on commercialization of technology and not enough on fundamental research?
Yes. These are a set of questions. If I forget one along the way,
I will remind you, no problem.
So why this change? Indeed, there were several drivers. Among them, I think a major one was the financial crisis of 2008-9. Why is that? It's because large corporations and large traditional employers stopped hiring or hired much less. So the risk for students, graduates to join a startup or to launch one was suddenly much lower. Since the risk of joining a startup was much lower as traditional employers stopped hiring or hired much less. But it's not only that there was less risk. Around this time, there were also very interesting technology development that created opportunities for entrepreneurs, such as the launch of the iPhone, which triggered the whole mobile telephony revolution, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, the genomic revolution, etc., and others. So suddenly, risk of joining a startup decreased, but opportunities also increased. And as a result, there was a surge of demand on the part of students for training in entrepreneurship, for courses, for experiential opportunities also. What I think the MIT students realized early on that the center of gravity of the economy was shifting towards the technology sector. And for the first time, entrepreneurship was viewed as a credible career path. Of course, it had been for some people before, but it was relatively a minority, but suddenly it was perceived as such by a critical mass of people, I'd say. So that created demand on the Institute to provide more courses, more opportunities in various forms related to entrepreneurship. Another factor is, I think, the competition of Stanford University, which has the advantage of being located in Silicon Valley, as we all know. Especially the School of Engineering was losing applicants to Stanford, and part of the reason was the lure of Silicon Valley and entrepreneurship. Finally, I would say the most of the donors in the last decade or decades were entrepreneurs. Yes, such as could think of the McGoverns, broad, etc. And many names, waste data, an early one, double off, and so on. So it was clear that that this was a source of funding for MIT, and nurturing this class of entrepreneurs was important. There was also, I think, pressure from the alumni and donors to put more on MIT to put more emphasis on entrepreneurship. So these are a few of the factors. Could you remind me your other question?
Yeah, no. So it sounds very interesting in that despite having had so many courses, and I believe even in my time there are quite a lot of different entrepreneurship courses, that it wasn't until Susan Hockfield and then President Life actually came to centralizing kind of the entrepreneurship ecosystem at MIT or the teaching, right? But if you go back, kind of several presidents ago, I think that, well, actually, let me, before I jump into the next question, going back to the questions is, do you think that putting structures in place to teach entrepreneurship, would that actually have a negative impact in terms of stifling innovation?
Mm-hmm.
And then actually, is there a danger of overemphasizing commercialization and not doing enough fundamental research?
Yes. So about the bureaucratization of the organization of entrepreneurship at MIT, I think it's a risk. It's a risk that MIT should be aware of and should try to absolutely to avoid, of course. On the other hand, entrepreneurship at MIT is no longer this little extracurricular activities of a few student clubs and a few alumni doing mentoring or things like that. It's now a huge phenomenon, as you said, like more than 60 classes, more than 80 extracurricular activities. So it's probably inevitable that it needs a little bit of structure, but it's indeed, I expect that it's going to be a fine line to navigate. And we should not forget that the strength of entrepreneurship at MIT so far has been this let a thousand flower bloom kind of approach. So far, there has not been too much centralization and bureaucracy, as far as I can see. The big move towards centralization now seems to be the innovation headquarters that was created a few months ago. It's a space in a building on Kendall Square that centralizes on 2 floors, I think, most of the entities dealing with entrepreneurship, except the Trust Center. So is there a danger that there will be too much emphasis on entrepreneurship, on firm formation, and at the expense of research? I'm optimistic. I don't think so, because, of course, all the focus today is on entrepreneurship, and we could get the impression that, well, it's going to almost take over research, but research and education still is the main focus of MIT, unfortunately, and even the focus on entrepreneurship is on entrepreneurship education. So all these activities we refer to, these 80 extracurricular activities, for instance, one condition is that they have an educational, for them to exist is to have an educational purpose. So I'm relatively optimistic on this aspect, yes.
talk a little bit more about this innovation headquarters? This is actually quite new for me as well. And can you also, for kind of the audience, just kind of get us up to speed? For those of us who graduated many years ago, can you kind of help get us up to speed on kind of Martin Trust Center as well, and how kind of their approach to teaching education, what their ethos is?
Yes, the innovation headquarters is something, an initiative that fits within the whole redevelopment or the renovation. I don't know what the right word of Kendall Square. If you go back to campus today, you would, and you had not been back for a few years, you wouldn't almost recognize the place. It's a lot of new buildings and so on. And MIT wanted Kendall Square to be the gate, or one of the two gates to campus, and with a focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. So within Kendall Square, and one of those new buildings is the innovation headquarters, so-called innovation headquarters. That brings together various entities that are devoted to entrepreneurship. For instance, the Deshpande Center is an entity that is devoted to bringing science from the lab to the market and bridge this gap. It's a very specific focus. There is the Legatum Center for Entrepreneurship, etc. The Legatum Center is focused on entrepreneurship in developing countries. The Venture Mentoring Service is a mentoring services run by Alumni for the benefit of members of the community, etc., etc. And they are all centered there. You had a question about the Trust Center as well.
Yeah, just 1 second before I jump on the question. Look, that I think Kim just sent a link on the chat group, and I think Jean-Jacques, you were kind enough to post 2 links on the chat group to everyone that shows the resources at MIT. So innovation.mit.edu as well as entrepreneurship.mit.edu. So those might be 2 resources for everyone online to jump in and learn more.
Yes, for those who want to have a better idea of the state of entrepreneurship today and what all these initiatives do, I suggest to go to the first link, which gives quite an exhaustive and up-to-date list of those initiatives, those student clubs and alumni initiatives and institutional initiatives as well. And the second link is the link to the annual reports that the Trust Center publishes every year, and that are full of information and links.
Thank you for that. Yeah, just getting back to my question on the Martin Trust Center. It seems like they have an entire year-long course on entrepreneurship with a capstone event called Delta V or Delta 5 that happens over the summer for a select group of entrepreneurial teams that want to take their potential business plan or startup to the next level. Could you kind of walk us through the type of courses that these students are enabled to learn about, and also talk a little bit about this contrast between, when I was growing up, people would talk about entrepreneurship as people are born entrepreneurs, but the the Martin Trust Center is actually saying that no, entrepreneurship is actually a craft, and that you need to experience it, and you can take classes and you can develop and hone those skill sets. And so can you kind of provide us a little bit of context and a structure for that?
Yes, indeed. Let's say the philosophy of the Martin Trust Center and of MIT in general with regard to entrepreneurship is that we are not born entrepreneurship, but these entities and the trust entity in particular ambitions to train entrepreneurship, to form entrepreneurship through training and experience. The only thing is that it believes that you cannot achieve that through lectures or traditional way of teaching through lectures only, but you need lectures to give provide the basic concept to the students, but you absolutely need to combine it with learning by doing, by putting students in real world situations where they will have to solve problems through internship or boot camps, hackathon, practice-oriented courses, etc., etc. And the Trust Center sees a continuum between the curricular activities, the classes, and those extracurricular activities as a continuum of the pedagogy. If we want. And so the view of training students in entrepreneurship is indeed an apprenticeship, like crafts indeed. And it's a bit more akin to a profession like architecture, law, or medicine, which are much more advanced in this way of training people. But the Trust Center argues that we shouldn't consider entrepreneurship as a discipline or as a science, but rather as a craft, indeed.
I mean, I think that how to say this? MIT's primary goals are really around research and education. I mean, those are its fundamentals. And so, if I just kind of set MIT aside for just 1 second, how do you think about and what do you think is the role of entrepreneurship in universities?
Yes. So I said earlier that entrepreneurship in terms of a firm formation had become a credible career path for students and graduates. So I think if universities nowadays don't prepare their students for such a career path, and only prepare their students to work in, let's say, Fortune 500 companies or government, they probably fail in their mission today. And even more than that, again, as I said earlier, not everybody becomes an entrepreneur, but everybody benefits from developing an entrepreneurial mindset. And those graduates who have that opportunity will then go into government or corporations or philanthropy where they, with their entrepreneurial mindset, where they will become change agents. And sometimes it's these organizations, government, corporations, that need most change, disruption, innovation, etc. So I think that if universities today don't prepare students for an entrepreneurial career, they fail their mission. But also, it's even worse if they don't convey an entrepreneurial mindset to their students independently of what they do afterwards. I think they also, and even more so, fail in their mission because they fail to train the innovators of tomorrow that will need to solve the great challenges that the world is facing today, such as climate change, energy, the pandemic and health issues, etc.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as I think about large corporations today, right? If you look at the largest corporations 100 years ago, how many of them have survived to 2020, right? And so there's a role for entrepreneurship as startups. There's also a role for entrepreneurship, or what we call entrepreneurship, in large corporations, and perhaps that's equally important. And so that's a really new perspective, I would say, though, in kind of universities and how they approach pedagogy and the philosophy of education. If I take kind of the same words, the role of entrepreneurship in universities, and flip it around a little bit, what would you think is the role of universities in entrepreneurship?
I'm sorry?
What do you think is what do you see as the role for universities in entrepreneurship? Do you believe that, entrepreneurs, or that it's important for startup entrepreneurs to have taken courses in entrepreneurship? Do you think that entrepreneurship should be more widely taught across the board at many different schools?
I think what should primarily be taught and in priority is to teach the students how to develop an entrepreneurial mindset. A second answer to your question is then the technology transfer side of universities. So universities produce science, and this science should, or a part of it at least, should be translated and go to the marketplace. And so they have universities have a great responsibility there to make society benefit from the science that's going on at the university. So that's a great responsibility, and often something that doesn't work well in most part of the world and most institutions. It works quite well at MIT, but unfortunately, most universities see the licensing of patents, their patents, as a revenue-generating activity. Whereas the philosophy at MIT is summarized by Lita Nelson, who was the director of the Technology Licensing Office for many years, as impact, not income. Impact, what does it mean? Well, we're trying to facilitate the transfer of technology through entrepreneurship to society, because we believe that that's going to create great impact in terms of employment, wealth creation, innovation, etc. And society, and even MIT, will get medium-term, long-term a great payback for all this employment and wealth creation and innovation. Whereas and so MIT asks for a relatively modest contribution from the startup in exchange for the license, whereas many universities load the startup with royalties and huge requests for huge equity stakes and other expenses for the startup to take on. And of course, the potential success for the startup is much lower. It's not difficult to understand when the most important thing in a startup is, of course, the teams. The second more important thing is cash. Because if you take the cash away from the startup, you don't improve its chance for success. So the MIT philosophy is the opposite. Is impact, not income.
Yeah, so one of my favorite characters in your book is indeed Rita Nelson, I guess, class of '64. And I loved all of her quotes and the insight that she provided to the entire history of entrepreneurship. And it's easy to see why, with her at the top, kind of leading this, that there's such a thriving ecosystem. Just kind of wanted to bring the conversation back to kind of MIT and the alumni community here, right? We are kind of part of the MIT Alumni Association. And in reading the book, it was very clear that alumni played a really critical role in the entrepreneurial spirit. And can you tell us a little bit about how in the past the alumni in Boston were involved in developing that ecosystem?
Yes, you are right. Alumni played a critical early role in developing entrepreneurship at MIT and still do and have played a critical role all over during these decades. The initial initiative was indeed an initiative from MIT local Boston alumni who lobbied the MIT Alumni Office back then, talking about the late 60s, early 70s, to create a seminar on how to create your own company. And it also involved a lot of entrepreneurial energy on their part and navigating the organization and so on. And they managed to do it. It was a huge success. I think the first seminar had like 200 or 300 participants. So there was an underlying need there. They replicated the seminar across the United States with other alumni clubs. And that led to the MIT Enterprise Forum, which has been a major actor on campus and outside campus over the decades. And this continued over the years. Alumni have played critical role as mentors, as lecturers. They've been on advisory boards of various entities such as the Trust Center and also as donors. They still do. For instance, VMS, Venture Mentoring Service, is an entity providing mentoring to students and other members of the community, and has like close to 200 mentors giving their time and offering their time to help entrepreneurial projects get off the ground.
Are these 200 some mentors, are they all based in Boston, or can the global alumni community participate?
Yes, originally yes, but now following COVID, everything is done, or most of these things are done online like we do today. And actually it's a good development, one of the few good developments due to COVID, because in the sense that it gives opportunities to MIT alumni around the world to contribute or to engage with MIT or with one or another entity within MIT. So the answer, yes, most of these things related to what's going on campus we're doing in person, not they are often organized through Zoom. And I think it offers great opportunities for alumni around the world to engage, to participate as mentors and in other capacities. I'm sorry, one of the reasons why I gave this link that lists all the extracurricular activities about entrepreneurship is to allow some of the participants here today to dig a little bit deeper in this material, but also for those who want to engage with these entities, they could do it. They have the emails and all the information they need. Usually these entities devoted to entrepreneurship also send newsletters. So if you are in their email list, you will get newsletters and you'll be up to date what they are doing. And I also encourage people to visit regularly the website of the Trust Center, and probably nowadays the Innovation Headquarters website.
So if I were an alumni that wanted to start a company, would I be able to tap into the MIT resources to learn a little bit about entrepreneurship and perhaps not formally take a class, but can I kind of get some of the materials to learn how to develop either a pitch or develop certain other entrepreneurial skill sets?
Oh, yes. There is a lot of material up there. You will find a lot of material on the website of the Trust Center. Bill Ouellette, its director, wants to provide to everybody, to the world, let's say, all its material, its methodology as open source material, as he said. So it's out there, you can download it. And there are also online courses on entrepreneurship. There is also OpenCourseWare, which is also posts a lot of material, syllabus and readings and so on. So yes, for those willing to dig into the MIT website, there is a lot of material.
Just last question from me this evening. So many universities, cities, corporates have all wanted to get the MIT blueprint for entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship to help them grow and develop. But culture is so important. But culture is not easily replicated. We can't just look at MIT culture and say, we want to create a risk-taking culture, we want to create a decentralized culture. All these are very difficult to replicate. So if you were to give advice to a corporation or university that wanted to foster a more entrepreneurial ecosystem, what kind of practical advice would you give to an institution to develop that? And kind of where can they start?
Yes, it's true that culture cannot be replicated. And that's why I go a little bit out of my way in the book to not to present MIT as a model, but rather as a case study to trigger conversations, local conversation in other universities, for instance, about how to stimulate entrepreneurship. In the last chapter, Lessons Learned, I try to identify a number of things that have worked well at MIT and could perhaps help people outside reflect on whether it's relevant to them or not. For instance, I think it's important, and it's the case at MIT, to make a distinction between support for entrepreneurial education for students and support for technology transfer through entrepreneurship. These are quite different things, but often there is a confusion in many institutions. I see a lot of confusion in many institutions, and they mix the two, and it's often not with great results. Most universities who build a curriculum, an entrepreneurship curriculum, create a class on how to pitch or how to write a business plan. But I think that it's necessary to go beyond the business plan, and we see at MIT that there is a whole sequence of courses, from courses just to raise awareness about entrepreneurship, about helping students come up with ideas, etc., to more specific and more advanced courses, basic skills for entrepreneurship, some specialized courses in marketing, finance, negotiation, etc., to sector-focused courses like healthcare, finance, etc. And then the capstone program, the Delta V, which is the 3-month accelerator program over the summer for those students who are the most motivated and want to go into an entrepreneurship career and launch their company at the end of the program in September. So it's also, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I think it's important. It's also key to base the teaching methodology on this apprenticeship model of combining lectures to help students learn basic concepts, but then also learning by doing in various forms, and look at curricular and extracurricular activities as a continuum. Often in many universities, I see that entrepreneurship is taught only through lectures. And entrepreneurship is not really adapted to be only taught through lectures. It's a little bit like training a doctor without giving him the opportunities of internships, if you wish. So I think something also very key is multidisciplinarity. I think a great strength at MIT has been to require students to form mixed teams of students with different skills. So typically, for instance, engineering students with management students. That is key because they bring to the table different skills, different views of the world, and that helps thinking solutions that are outside of the box. That's why I think that business schools, standalone business schools, are at a disadvantage because they don't have this easily this opportunity of bringing in engineers with management students. So these are a few ideas. There are more of them in the book. So some of the ideas of tangible, concrete lessons learned, but maybe I would like to end by saying that all these tangible things, for instance, it's tempting for an institution to say, "Oh, this Delta V accelerator, that's wonderful. We'll copy it and do it in our institution, for instance." But if you have a university where that is more top-down than bottom-up, where there is no ethos of problem solving, if there is no tradition of multidisciplinarity and learning by doing, and so these cultural characteristics, it's probably going to be very difficult to get entrepreneurship rolling within the institution. And so, of course, you cannot transplant a culture, but maybe you can nudge the organization a little bit towards more multidisciplinarity or problem solving and the search for impact, etc. I would start perhaps with role models. I think this whole thing needs also role models, and I would encourage universities to identify people who are entrepreneurs who could play a role of role models and, put them forward, advertise them, and because that really, and that was the case at MIT also, it gets the ball rolling.
I believe
Students.
we have quite a number of role models for us to learn from, and I hope that I guess learning from what we're saying today, also the ability to embrace failure at times, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
to experiment and to fall a little bit and to dust ourselves off. Jean-Jacques, thank you so much for your time this evening. Really enjoyed speaking to you and learning from your experience. And I just encourage everyone who's listening or to sort of buy or download on Kindle From the Basement to the Dome, How MIT's Unique Culture Created a Thriving Entrepreneurial Community. It's actually a fast read and a good read. And I'll hand it back to David.
Thank you. May I add something?
Yes.
Just a second. I just remember that another source of resources for the participants is the website that I created for the launch of the book. So I will quickly paste it also in the chat if you allow me. So I need to send it to everyone. Book. This is it. So there is additional information there, some interviews, Q&As, and so on. So it could be a good introduction to the book for those who consider reading it.
Fantastic. So for those who are just joining us, it's www.jean-jacques-degroof-books.com. Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jean-Jacques and Elaine, for the very, very insightful dialogue over the last hour. It's been years since my own graduation from MIT, and it's enlightening to see and hear how entrepreneurship and the culture of entrepreneurship have evolved and developed over the years at MIT. I've certainly known that MIT produces a lot of very, very successful entrepreneurs, and now we've learned some of the reasons why. Thank you very much for joining us, and I wish everybody a great evening ahead of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.